Alright, I guess since I'm already basically talking about this, we'll just start. So, the first common lesson is the one that we talked about when we discussed the passing step, which is the if you want to show art, look left, path right with hewing, and left with right if you wish to strongly fence. So this one, basically you have, you know, if you want to fence strongly, stand with the left foot forward and hew from the right side. It's false and incorrect if the right side remains behind, so take a step. So the hew will be too short and won't have the path to its correct side. So basically, to paraphrase, you want to take a step when you cut. You want your cuts to be long and correct, and you want to be in balance with it. So that to me is the gist of what this is. The first part is saying here. So the second one, whoever goes after hews permits his art little joy. This is when you approach the man on guard, you shall not stand still with your sword and wait until after he hews his hews to you. Know that all fencers who look upon another's hews and don't wish to do anything other than parry, they permit themselves quite little joy in the art because they will be severely struck by it. So, yeah, I think the basic, understanding of this, to me anyway, is just don't be, have an offensive disposition when you fence. So to me, this is not saying never parry. It's just saying don't only parry. don't don't think you can win just by parrying. Just try to attack the other person also. I'll just quickly go through all of these and then we'll kind of wrap it up together. So hew nearing what you want, no change comes to the shield. To head to body, do not abandon the lighter hits, or the hits, I guess it's in this clause. With the entire body, fence what you wish to perform strongly. Hear it like this: when you approach the man on guard, whatever you then want to fence, you shall perform it with the strength of your entire body, and hew in with it nearing to his head, and with it you force him so that he must parry, and therefore may not come to any disengage, because you come too close to him with the point. If he then comes with the parry strong to your sword, give him a touch on his left arm, and step backward with it before his will be inside. So, my take on this is the main idea is to attack to your opponent and not to their sword. So attack to the openings of their body instead of the sword. And in this way they can't, change through or disengage against you like they could if you are attacking their sword. And then it gives you this little advice here. If he does parry strong to your sword, then give him a touch on the arm and step backwards before his will be inside. So my take on that part is the idea of opening up a shallow target by attacking a deep target. So if we have a strong attack, if we develop a strong attack to their head or their body to a deeper target, then it'll become easier for us to hit their arms or extremities or whatever when they go to defend against that deeper attack. And that's something that I do quite a bit in my fencing. So maybe I'm biased a little bit in that. Okay, next one. Here, what is simple there, do not fence left if you are right, and if you shrink, you are also very clumsy in the fencing. This is a good lesson. It touches upon a left-hander and a right-hander, and know how you shall hew so that one does not win your weakness in the sword with the first hew. And hear it like this. When you approach the man on guard, if you are then right-handed and want to fence strongly, don't hew the first hew, specifically the first hew, I have in this note here, from the left side because it is weak, and you may certainly not hold against when he binds to you strongly. Or if you hew from the right side, you may well hold strongly against, and work whatever you want at the sword. Similarly, if you are left-handed, also don't hew the first hew from the right side, but rather hew from the left side, because it is quite awkward and against the art for a right-hander to perform from the left side the same as it is also to a left-hander from the right side. So I guess this this little note here, specifically the first hew, it kind of names, and I had a little bit of trouble translating that part for a while, but I think I found a good compromise with it, meaning specifically the first hew. So I don't think it's saying never hew from, if you're right-handed, never hew from the left side, but the first hew should be from the strong side. You know, it's better for the first hew to be from the strong side. If you're right-handed, yeah. The right side if you're right-handed, left side if you're left-handed. So I've kind of been thinking about these common lessons lately, and if we take them individually, you kind of get, they're all kind of just random advice, a little bit like, all right, cut from your strong side, okay. Maybe it's a little bit better than your weak side. Maybe not. I mean, we all know that it's possible to cut from the left side the first cut and have that be successful. So there's, there's nothing in like the laws of fencing that says, a strong side attack will be, have a higher percentage of success than a weak side attack. Same with the other ones, especially this hew nearing what you want is, I think, the weirdest one to take on its own. But lately I've been considering all of them together as a whole. And if you do that, then you kind of start to see a sequence. It kind of starts to build a game for, like, maybe a beginner fencer or somebody who is, needs to start fencing. So you have 1, cut with a passing step, make sure your cut's long and has its correct path. 2, have an offensive disposition. 3, aim for a deep target, don't aim for their sword. And 4, do it from your strong side. So if you do all those things, if you're just starting fencing and you do all of those things, then you have a pretty decent idea of at least something you can do in like a fencing match. If you don't know anything else and somebody puts a sword in your hand and tells you those things, you at least have a direction. You can start playing the game. So that's kind of been my take on the common lessons, or these 4 common lessons anyway. Yeah, does anybody have any comments about that or anything? Or observations from, your personal fencing experience?
I have a question, actually. Have
Okay.
you seen have you succeeded at hewing to close to the man, as they say in this, without setting yourself up for counter strike? I noticed that there's a lot of a distance. Like, so sometimes, like, if you try to hew to the man, like, straight into their head,
Yeah.
you're really in range for bad things. So, what do you think the range is for that idea, the hew to the man? The hew
Well,
to the middle of the sword? Yeah, that's the question.
well, to answer your first question, do I do that in my fencing? Yes, all the time. I hit people on the head all the time in my fencing, and I think anyone here who's fenced me can attest to that. Um, as far as the ranges are concerned, I mean that's kind of a challenge of that's kind of like the challenge of fencing is being able to figure out the ranges and like how to open up an attack to the head or whatever or to a deeper target. Um, but if you have that idea in your head of I should aim for this deep target, I should go for long hits, then eventually you'll start to figure it out, the range issue. Especially especially the idea of using the threat uh, of that deep target attack to open up shallower targets is something that I do all the time in my fencing. Um, yeah. Does that answer your question? It's kind of a
Yeah,
non-answer.
it does. It does. Like, I was thinking also that there was somewhere, I think it's in Danzig, they say always fence with your point 11 inches away from your opponent. Because, yeah, no, I think that answers the question a lot, especially in saying that you'll figure it out. Because there's definitely a too close and there's definitely a too far. And it's not easily disseminatable. You do kind of need to figure it out. So that does answer my question.
Yeah, uh, so the half an L thing is what you're referring to, which is some people calculate it to around 11 inches or like 30 centimeters or something, which I think is like a foot. That's from 3227A, and I don't remember the exact context of it, but if you're, it's definitely not all fencing has to be that close because that's extremely close. If you are that close to your opponent, then it's a time to go immediately. Sometimes you can, like if you're fencing and you notice that your point is a foot away from your opponent's face, then stab them because you
Yeah,
can you can do it before they can react.
yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I think the 3227A thing is like cutting in, like ending your cut or like your Zornhau or something so that you're half an L distance away. But yeah, I'm not a 3227A studier, so
That definitely makes sense because I definitely have found like if you're fighting against a reckless fencer and you cut to their head, and I'm not that tall, I'm like 5'9" and I have shorter arms. So very often when I cut to my opponent's head, they're in very good range to just strike me recklessly in some other opening. And that was just I guess what I was building that question of the distance. But yeah, I don't know that that helps the conversation.
yeah. Well, I mean, if you're in range to hit somebody else, then they're also in range to hit you, unless you're way taller than them, of course. I wouldn't know anything about that. I'm just kidding. I would. Um, but yeah, I mean, you have to take into account that they can also hit you, I guess. But
Yeah.
as far as these common lessons go, I think the point is that they're like they're a starting point, you know. So of course you're not going to be perfect at like all this distance and whatever stuff, but at least it gives you something to start with and a direction to go when you're fencing.
Yes, it also sounds like something that Kenjutsu, if you don't know what to do, attack, 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 and then you'll figure out what to do based on the responses.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean that's kind of what we do in kendo. Just constantly attack until you figure out what's going on. Um, yeah, I don't think necessarily you have to, you know, like I said with whoever goes after Hughes, I don't think you necessarily they necessarily want you to constantly be attacking no matter what. You know, you got to parry sometimes. Sometimes your opponent does attack you, um, but you just want to be in that mindset of, you know, looking for the attack, trying to find the opportunity to attack your opponent. Um, yeah, and then like the more you do it, the better you get at finding the opportunities.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
All right, anything else on those four, or do you want to? Shall we move on to before and after? All right, let's move on then. Before and after, the two things are a wellspring of all art, weakness and strength, indes, with it note the word, so that you may learn to work and assess with art. If you frighten easily, never learn any fencing. This is before all else, that you shall correctly hear and understand the two things. That is the before and the after, and weakness and strength, and the word indes, because the entire foundation of all art of fencing comes from them. When you correctly hear and understand these things, and most importantly, not forget the word indes in all techniques which you perform, you will indeed be a good master of the sword, and may indeed teach princes and lords so that they may well survive with correct art of the sword in sport and in earnest. When you come sooner with the hew or otherwise, so that he must parry you, work nimbly indes in front of you with the sword or otherwise with other techniques, and let him come to no further work. When he comes sooner than you with the hew, so that you must parry him, work indes with the parry nimbly with the sword or otherwise, so that so you take his before with the after. That is called before and after. Now you shall, before all else, know weakness and strength of the sword. Hear it like this: from the crossguard until the middle, that is the strength; from the middle until the point is the weakness. And how you shall work at the sword towards the weakness and with the strength, you will find that written hereafter. So, before, after, weakness, strength, and indes. So these are kind of a well, yeah. So my understanding of these is they kind of make up a you know, a framework for understanding an exchange, or you know, understanding how like the dynamics of how Lichtenauer's fencing works. So we have the before. So the key word here is, for me, in my opinion, the key word of this is so that he must parry you. So that's used both in the before and the after, so that you must parry him. So my view on this, I take a very literal stance when it comes to before and after. So for before, I consider it when somebody attacks you in a way, or so when one person attacks in a way that the other person must either parry or get hit, then they're in the before. So for example, fencer A cuts towards B. If B parries and creates a bind, then they're in the before. Um, Example 2, A attacks B, and B fails to parry, and A hits, then it's kind of, it doesn't matter really who is in the before and after, because no bind was created and the exchange is over. So there's nothing to analyze anymore. But I guess we can say A was in the before because B should have parried. And the third example is A attacks, B steps back and avoids the attack. And, you know, we'll just look at that part of the exchange. So in that one, I don't think that A has the before because B doesn't parry. So my very literal view of this is that if there's no parry, there's no before. If there's no bind, there's no before. Same with after. So if you're trying to use this framework as I tried to define what Lichtenauer would consider to be an attack, then you run into some problems. It kind of becomes a tautology because you can say, you know, what is an attack? It's something that happens when the other person, you know, how do you define an attack? So someone does something where the other person must parry, but then you can ask, when must you parry? And the answer is when the other person attacks. So you get this circular logic here. You get this kind of, you know, tautology that makes it difficult. So still we need, if we want to define an attack, before and after is not good enough. We need to figure that out for ourselves. But still, before and after, in my opinion, is a good framework for defining what happened in an exchange, I guess you could say. I don't know if you can really use these as a prescriptive lesson. So there's always the question of, you know, how do you know when you're in the before, and how do you know when you're in the after? The simple answer is like whoever attacks first, but it's not always that simple in, you know, a fencing situation. Maybe both people are thinking about attacking at the same time, or maybe you don't notice when someone's attacking, or, you know, any number of things. So it's, you know, it's kind of difficult to use in that context, in my opinion. I think in order to determine that, you need to have some kind of other definition for an attack, which usually involves some kind of perceptible offensive movement. And then we'll have to get into right of way if we want to pursue that a little bit further. But so after that, we have weakness and strength are the other of the words, and they're just, as it's described here, parts of the sword. So you have from the cross guard to the middle is the strength. So we all know this, the strong part of the sword, and the middle to the point is the weakness, the weak part of the sword. And we all know that if we put our strong on the other person's weak, then we can push them around. and if they put, if the opposite happens, then they can push us around. So, and why that matters is because that's what's gonna make the difference when the swords are bound. So, the way I see this, you're working and assessing with art. So when you're in a bind, you're working strong or weak. And when you're not in a bind, when you're in the Zufechten or, looking to attack or defend, you assess before and after. So my kind of view on these words are before and after matters before a bind happens, and then when a bind happens, weakness and strength start to matter. And if there's no bind, then I don't think any of these words matter at all. I think they only come into play basically if something goes wrong. Yeah. And that's, from the strict must parry reading, I guess. And then indes, you can notice they tell you not to forget the word indes, but they don't explain what it is here. They don't explain indes until about halfway through the gloss. So indes is in the middle of the gloss. It's indes of the gloss. So yeah, that's your 5 words, and that's just my take on it. There's a lot of people who would probably disagree with me, but that's what I have to say. Does that make sense, or is that all like totally confusing? Probably didn't explain it well.
Makes sense to me.
Perfect.
Yeah, I like the framework shifts. I like that you're saying this matters now and this matters later. I've never really thought of that level of parsing. It's very interesting.
Yeah, there's so
Agreed.
like. Oh, go ahead, Steve.
I just said I completely agree. I've never heard it like broken down that way, but yeah, I dig it.
Yeah, there's, I think, a common way of understanding before and after is that it will shift during the exchange. So, a different way that I've heard of understanding it is, say, like A attacks B, B parries, and then immediately, stabs in, so A has to parry again. So, that would be A attacking in the before, and then B parrying in the knock, and then, indes moving to an attack, and then now B is in the before and A is in the after. That's the way that it's phrased in Ringek is kind of might suggest that. Steve, I just said the way that it's phrased in Ringek might suggest that, but the way that I kind of understand it from how it's put together here, and the must parry thing, and the strength and the weakness, is that once the swords are bound, before and after now doesn't really matter anymore. Now strong and weak take over, kind of as the important aspect, because now you're feeling. So your sight is going to be slower. The fastest the fastest response time is tactile. It's faster than like your sight. So when you're in a bind, you're not going to be looking at what's going on as much. You're going to be feeling. So before and after aren't really as important. Now strong and weak are the important aspects of the fight. What else to... Yeah. I'm sure there's other ways of understanding this that people have, but that's mine.
I have a question for you.
Go ahead.
Would you say that Indes is where the vor and knock can flip? I mean, I guess you kind of just pointed that out, but let me ask this another way. Do you think it's useful to think of Indes as something that can flip the vor and the knock?
I think Indes is definitely a point of change. It's I'll call it a decision point. And I guess whether or not it can flip for and knock depends on, what your opinion on for and knock is. But I guess the spatial way that I would think of Indes is a change of direction. So if you're in the knock, if the other person is the aggressor and you're defending and you want to do like a parry riposte or something, you parry and then you do an action hopefully based on some kind of feedback and not just a random action, but you do, whatever action you need to in order to, I guess, offend the person. So you're changing the original direction of your movement is towards their sword because you have to defend yourself, and you're shifting that direction to the openings of their body. From the other end, if you're attacking in the before, so it says, if you're in the before, then work nimbly Indes in front of you with other techniques and let them come to no further work. So if you're attacking in the before, you're aiming for one opening, and then the bind happens, and the shift of Indes is shifting to a different opening. So I do, like, if you want to put a spatial perspective to Indes, mine would be shifting, like changing direction, changing the direction of, I guess, what you're focusing on or what you're going towards. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. It almost sounds like the quantum area of fencing.
Yeah, me and TQ, and maybe some other people from the Discord, kind of, hammered out that framework, I guess, maybe a couple of years ago now. And then, yeah, I mean, Indes is interesting because, like, the shift from one direction to another is kind of a spatial way of thinking about it, but then Indes also, it's like in modern German and in like early New High German, it's a temporal word. It means like meanwhile or like during or whatever. So there's also the sense of, quickly doing something, making a decision and carrying it out immediately. So yeah, and it's the glosses were written, or like, around when we think the glosses were written was an interesting time that we kind of think the word Indes was shifting in meaning during that time from a more spatial meaning into a more temporal meaning. So, yeah. Actually, I guess I'll This is in the latest episode of Fencing by the Book. Michael Chittister talks about this a little bit, but in so like around the time I mentioned of the glosses, the meaning was shifting. So I guess you can have you can explain the explanation of indes in the gloss to be, readers would of the time would understand the meaning to be temporal, but that's not what indes means here. So we have this little explanation in the glosses to explain to you that no, we're actually, talking about the older, more spatial meaning of indes. And then by the time of Joachim Meyer, Meyer actually writes in his book, when talking about indes, he says that people mistakenly think that the word indes comes from the Latin intus, which means within, which would give the spatial meaning. But I'm here to tell you that that's not correct. It actually comes from the German word indes, which is a temporal word. So that's what indes means. So the fact that Meyer, has to go out and say that people say this, but they're wrong, means that, people were saying it and that they thought it was true. So what Chittister was, kind of wild theorizing is that by that time, the spatial indes of Middle High German had completely been forgotten. So people, who still wanted this spatial meaning, attributed it instead to this Latin word, which I thought was an interesting idea. But yeah, 5 words. They're never actually called the 5 words. I think 3227A is the only one that actually calls them the 5 words. In the RDL glosses, they're just kind of things that are here. But yeah, they say that they're important, so we should probably have at least some opinion of what they mean. They don't really come up too much in the glosses, though. In the rest of the text, strangely enough. Occasionally, they'll tell you like do this before or whatever, but other than that. All right. I guess let's just get through the 5 hues and the Hauptstück, and then we can talk about whatever. Are there any more comments about the 5 words or questions? All right. Learn 5 hues from the right hand against the weapons, then we believe, wishing to learn in art. There are 5 secret hues. Whoever can counter them with correct art without harm, he will be praised by other masters, and is fair that his art shall continue to be more worthwhile to him than another. And how you shall hew the hues with 3 techniques, you find that all written hereafter. Wrath hue, crooked, lateral, has squinter with parter, fool parries, pursuit, overrun, set aside, disengage, retract, run through, slice off, press hands, hang, wind with openings, strike, catch, sweep, stab with shoving. Here you will be told the main parts of the art of the sword, what they're each called, with their names, so that you can continue to hear and understand them. Note the 5 hues. The first is the wrath, crooked, lateral, squint, and parting. So we have Zornhau, Krumpau, Zwerhau, Schielhau, and Scheitelhau. And then the pieces, the 4 guards, the 4 attacks, vier versetzen is how I translate them. The pursuit, overrun, set aside, disengage, retract, run through, slice off, hand press, hanging, and wanding. So you might be more familiar with the German for these. So Vierleger, vier versetzen, nachreißen, überlaufen, absetzen, durchwechseln, zucken, durchlaufen, abschneiden, hinedrücken, hängen, and winden. Therefore the hues and the pieces are 17. You will find them written hereafter equally, one after the other, and what you shall fence from them. So this is just like a table of contents, I guess, for the gloss. Everything that we're going to be learning throughout the gloss from the Zettel. Yeah, I mean, I don't have too much to say about these. I guess I'll say that it's kind of unique amongst fencing books, even of the period, to have this kind of structure of like the hues and then like the, they're not specific, the pieces are not specific techniques, but like concepts and families of techniques are what they really are. So usually with like common formats usually start with guards and then say either list techniques or things that you can do from the guards, or they'll just have a listing of techniques, of like individual techniques with pictures or something. So for example, Fiore kind of does both of those. Like he starts out with the guards and then talks about some attacks and then just has his listing of techniques. And then there's like Wallerstein is just a listing of techniques with pictures. And then even the later parts of the gloss, the armored and the horseback, kind of fit the format of like, okay, here are some guards and here are some things that you can do from the guards. So it's interesting here, especially since we don't get the text on the four guards until basically halfway through the gloss. So pretty cool, I think. People have different opinions on why this is. One theory that I've heard is that this is actually 2 systems that were kind of grafted together. So the 5 hues were their own system and the 12 pieces were a different system. And Lichtenauer kind of, Frankenstein shoved them together, like putting some things in each section to make it look like they all belong. I'm not sure if I buy that theory, but I think it's interesting. So I guess I'll open the floor if anybody has any questions or comments or anything, or wants to talk about anything else.
One thing that comes to mind is what my friend says about teaching. And she says that there's 3 ways to teach. There's teach someone how you learn, put someone in your mindset, and when you do so, they can follow you because they're in your mindset. And I forgot the third one. But this feels like the second, which is put someone in your mind, make them meditate, your brain work. And then once you meditate on the concept, then you can better absorb what they're about to tell you because it's dependent upon being in, which is how I read the hang, wind with opening, strike, catch, sweep, stab with shoving. I read it as the content of how to wind. I don't know if it is the content, but my brain plugged all that in as how to. So I wonder if these are words and ideas to meditate, be filled in later, to place you in the mindset of the person trying to.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, or just like priming you to, yeah, like priming your mindset for the way that the gloss is going to be laid out or the way that it's going to be presented. Anything like that, maybe.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I've, I don't know, I kind of have been, when I first started the Bucks Club, my plan was to, go through the Zettel in order and kind of present ideas that way, and then I guess have a common core of basics that we practice every class. But throughout the big picture of everything, go through in order and you know kind of trust the pedagogy of the Zettel and glosses. And I think it's worthwhile to do that. But I've been questioning it a little bit lately. I've had a lot of time to think about this stuff, and I've been questioning it. But
What questions do you have regarding that? I have some ideas of my own, but I'd like to hear what you have to say.
basically, just questioning if it's optimal. I guess what the what the best order of presenting fencing ideas is, or alternatively, um, if I'm doing it justice or presenting it correctly in the way that it's intended to be presented. Maybe it is closer to optimal, but I'm not doing it justice. You know what I mean?
I think so. For my part, I think there are certainly worse ways to do it. There are certainly less productive ways to do it, and I don't know of any better way to.
Yeah.
The only thing I kind of tilt towards is teaching people the guards and the hues first, just kind of not in like not in any sort of like intensive way, but at least getting people familiar, with what I consider to be like the bare bones,
Yeah.
and then going through everything. This way, they're not, they're kind of acclimated from the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Do you-
mean, we
do you
do
feel-
we do like warm ups, and they always involve like we end up going into the different guards. But I don't like specifically teach the people the guards. They're just like part of, if someone's on their first day of fencing, they're part of that warm up. And I say, go to this guard. I don't tell them what it is, but they look around and see what everybody else is doing and, just mimic what they're doing. So I guess in a way, I do, but I don't like explicitly, go around and the only thing I explicitly teach people on their first day is the Zwerchhau. And I really like my method of teaching people the Zwerchhau, and everybody always gets it every time, and I love it. But other than that, I'd have, people watch and pick that stuff up on their own. But I guess, in a way, it's not pure at least an hour because you don't not teach any guards until halfway through, I guess.
Yeah, but I think if he were here to comment, I think he would. I think he would approve of what you do. Even if you're giving everybody sort of a peek at the guards, before anything
Yeah.
else, it kind of it lets them get their legs under them. It sort of equips them a little bit for what comes later.
Yeah, I think also this was this way of teaching was more designed for one-on-one rather than a group setting. So if you're teaching somebody one-on-one, then it's absolutely possible to not teach them the guards till halfway through. You just have them do all the movements that they need to do. Show them start with the sword on your shoulder, and then all this stuff, and then maybe you'll move through guards, and because you get through all the Fear Versetzen before you even get to the four guards. So by the time they get to the four guards, they've never necessarily used them, but they've been exposed to all of the guards, including long point. And then you can, do
Wouldn't they have
fencing
been-
exercises because they've read the common lessons, so they have some direction in fencing, so you can have them pick stuff up that way. But anyway, Ashanti, what did you have to say?
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, wouldn't they have been exposed to something maybe resembling the guards because you're supposed to know some degree of fencing before you learn Lichtenhauer's system? So would you have been exposed to some version of the guards in theory?
Probably. We don't really have any way of knowing,
Because
but
that's the hardest part.
more likely than not, they would.
Yeah, because that to me seems like the hardest part is that to give someone a base knowledge of common fencing, which we just don't know what that is, before we teach them Lichtenhauer, which is designed to teach someone who already knows common fencing.
Yeah.
What I think is funny is that even if we do look at some of the texts that are considered to be common fencing that have survived, they don't even go over any basics either. They still expect you to have a common baseline.
Yeah. There's not really any early texts that teach absolute basics.
I think Meyer comes the closest, but he comes way
Right.
after. A
Yeah,
lot of the major stuff's already been laid.
Right. I'm talking 15th century sources, not Meyer.
Yeah. I mean, even Fior, who says that his stuff is meant to teach beginners, doesn't explain a whole hell of a lot
Yeah.
as far as very basic stuff goes.
No, he does not.
I find it funny that he claims in his prologue that his book is meant to preserve the art and to teach people who are new, yet he dedicates it to someone who already had a background in fencing.
Yeah.
It's in his dedication. So I found that to be a funny contradiction when I first read through it.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any source that really teaches the basics other than Meyer, and that's kind of Meyer writes in his book about how there's no there's comprehensive volumes on all other tons of other subjects, but not on fencing. And even though we know there were all these other fencing texts, we know that he owned other fencing texts because he has a copy of Ringek and Lev, but those didn't count to him. I guess they weren't printed, so.
I mean, I know I was reading through a while back. It was Marston's book, Hema and Its Context. And in one part of the book, he goes over how there were certain fencers in fencing guilds at the time who actually didn't like the fact that fetch books were being written. And they said that quills don't belong in the fencing guilds, swords. And they argued that you really shouldn't be writing down fencing because you can only teach it physically. So perhaps that's why a lot of the basic stuff was never survived, because it was never written down in the first place because they thought it was extraneous.
Yeah. Yeah, I did not know that. I own that book, but I haven't read it. I would like to see the source for that comment.
I mean, I can see if he has like a footnote or something. I forget where exactly in the book it is. It's literally right next to me. I'll see if I can find it.
Okay. Yeah, I should read that book, I guess, sometime.
I mean, it's fairly interesting. He writes a lot about the polar saber stuff, but that's also like his personal interests, so he obviously has a bias towards it.
Sure.
But other than that, I feel like it's really well written.
Hmm. Yeah, I want to get people sparring earlier when we start again.
You know, I find it funny that you say you want to get people started even earlier because I know that there's been a lot of contention, at least on the HEMA subreddit, as long as I've been a member of it, that
Yeah.
said that they want people to not spar until they have like a year's experience or whatever.
Well,
But I
that's way
remember
too much.
starting to spar when I had like 2 months experience,
Yeah,
and I didn't think there was any detrimental impact.
yeah,
So I find it funny how so many people want to make people wait for so fucking long.
yeah. Even at my most traditional, I thought that you know, a year is way too long.
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, our policy has pretty much been like whenever you get gear. But
Yeah.
I want to introduce, you know, Geckens and like Boffers and have people start sparring on like their first class.
I think
I sparred for the first time at literally my second day, my second.
Yeah, but the like masking gloves with wooden swords doesn't count. I want like I want everything to every target to be available. I don't like the just masking glove stuff. I don't think it's good.
Yeah, I can see that.
I think the biggest thing with this is structure and posture. And that's coming from my personal experiences fencing, coming into fencing, is that the thing that you probably gain the most from learning a fencing lesson would be good structure and good posture. So that's where I kind of stand in agreement with the JSA stuff, that you don't want to develop bad habits.
Yeah, that's the you
For
know
like our shoulders back. Yeah, yeah. Go ahead, sorry.
so that's kind of the reason that people have for preventing people from sparring too early is because they want their form like bad habits, really the fear of developing bad habits. But it's kind of a I don't think that there's how do I put this. I don't think that bad habits are as scary of a problem as people make them out to be. And like, how perfect do you want the person to be before they even start? Like, at some point, you gotta fence, because otherwise, you don't know. You can't contextualize any of the stuff that you're learning.
Basic drills in a vacuum only get you so far.
Right.
I think for me, the thing that I would probably teach as, someone who wouldn't have taught in the school before, but because of what I messed up in the beginning, was how to create good structure in long point. So just put both people in long point, set their shoulders down and back, get their hips in the right, and let them just create good pressure in the bind. Wrestling tests your structure. It'll be a really good way to let them know really quickly if they're pushing with the wrong muscle. Because I spent like a large portion of the beginning of my fencing using only my upper shoulders to generate power and wondering why my Zornhound never. So I definitely think there could be like a singular exercise that test how well they're holding their sword structure.
But there's no reason that you can't also like fence while you do that.
Mm.
You can still develop your skill and also like, you know, be sparring and like learning how to contextualize the things you're learning. In fact, I think
Yeah.
it makes the things that you're learning, you know, even more effective.
I can see that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that I can. For all,
But it's
I'm sorry, for all the
It's-
bad habits I've
go,
developed over
go
the
ahead,
years.
you go.
Okay. Yeah, like I've developed my share of bad habits for sure, but I'm not going to assign blame to the fact that I started sparring almost immediately. If I have a bad habit and fail to remedy it, it's only because I have not employed the proper remedy, not because I started doing one thing too early or failed to do one thing too late.
Yeah. And you know what? Not sparring can also develop bad habits.
Yeah, yeah. I just
Yeah.
I just
Go
think
ahead,
that
Ashant.
in a vacuum kind of situation, I do think that only like I do not agree with like how Tristan with the cutting has to like make you never step when you're cutting and everything like that. I definitely think you shouldn't focus on perfecting a thing, but there is some in a vacuum that exists, I think, and I think creating pressure in a bind and using that, I think for me, I wouldn't stop people from sparring early, but I would definitely be like, all right, let's check your posture and your structure. Let's make sure you're using the right muscle. And then maybe do that as a warm up every class to just create pressure in a bind. Because if you can't create pressure in a bind, you can't take the center line. And if you can't take the center line, none of the Lichtenauer technique or the Zornhouse stuff won't work. So if someone's like, oh, I keep doing Zornhouse, but I can't get it to work, well, you need some basic stuff to do that. Can you safely control a weapon and can you hold structure? And I don't think that takes a year. But I do think it should be a check and balance. I don't know. Yeah, that's my idea.
Yeah, I don't think that you need to perfect your, you know, your center line strength before you start sparring. I think that's something that you can learn as you go.
Yeah.
I mean, for what it's worth, I remember reading that some of the fencing masters that wrote later treatises do talk about in the beginning of their books how to properly teach, and a lot of them are highly, highly meticulous about making students wait before they spar with specific individuals. I know, was it Achille Marazzo, I believe, who basically you had to, what was it? You were basically in training for like a year or two before you even went up against like an intermediate fencer, and before that you were just doing basic cuts, solo drills, katas. It would be 6 months before you did dual drills. Like we're talking like really, really long periods of time doing basically jack squat by today's standards
Well,
before
okay.
he had you really do something.
If we're talking about like Marazzo, you know, in what year was he? Like around
1536, I believe.
30s.
That's later ones.
Yes.
Later ones. Yeah. So I don't know if that has any reflection on earlier ones. If it would be similar.
My question was, how did they spar? Because if we're talking about sparring with no gear and like, you know, fetters or whatever kind of weapon they had, then maybe if that was my only choice for sparring, then maybe I would make people wait a bit longer. You know what I mean?
Right. We do have technological advancements that take the pain off a bit.
Right. But if we have, you know, Gekkens available and, you know, gear that makes sparring with fetters, you know, pretty safe, not really as much of a reason to wait. But
yeah.
I don't know. Maybe Marazzo had other priorities too, but you know.
I mean, Marazzo's also like the king of solo drills for his time. That's like what most of his books made of, so I can see why maybe he'd favor them.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I always kind of scoffed a bit when I saw people online being like, I make my students wait like a year and a half before sparring. It's like, I'm surprised they even still have an interest if you make them wait that damn long.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
I'm
go ahead, Steve.
Thank you. It's hard to keep anybody if you're gonna make them wait that long. First thing they want to do when they walk into class is hit somebody with.
Yeah.
So you gotta throw them a bone. You gotta give them something.
Yeah. I mean, in kendo, at my dojo, usually it was a 6-month wait for people. But then you also get people who like never want to spar.
Mhm.
Maybe they come and all they want to do is just like, do swings and, do some paired drills. And when it comes to sparring, they just like, that's not why they're there. I mean, I don't understand that personally, because that's, when I started, that's all I wanted to do. Like, that's why I started. But some people are just like that. They just don't want to spar.
Well, yeah, because I remember when I first started, I was telling one of my friends at school that I was doing it, and he seemed interested in doing it. I was like, oh, yeah, maybe you can come one time. And he was like, you guys don't actually hit each other, do you? And I was like, well, no shit. And he's like, oh, well, I don't want to come anymore. I'm like, what the fuck? I'm like, what do you think we did?
Did you tell them we wear gear?
For sure. Huh?
Did you tell them
What'd
we
you
wear gear?
I mean, yeah, of course I told him we did that. But I mean, there's two kinds of people when they start, right? At least in my experience. Some who think that gear does absolutely nothing, and some that think it performs miracles, right? So maybe he just didn't think that the gear didn't really protect very much, because he probably had the term sword as a weapon ingrained too deeply in his head.
Hi, folks. I'm gonna say that when I started sparring, I didn't want to. I'm very concerned with my aggression levels, and I wanted to learn to control my before I. So it took me over 2 years before I started sparring Shanti.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. That's fair.
I think everybody can kind of like move at their own pace, Like there's no reason to mandate sparring.
Right.
But yeah, but so yeah, if people just like you said, Steve, if people want to come there and learn the forms and do pair drills and just sort of go about their business that way, that's cool,
Yeah.
Or if they feel they're not ready, then whatever, they get to take as much time as they want. But yeah, on the other hand, if they've got the itch, then it couldn't hurt to, under controlled conditions, sort of give them the wherewithal to scratch it.
Right, yeah. And I think Gekkens are going to be good for that. Like Gekkens with like masks and, lacrosse gloves, I think would be fine for beginners to use. They're a little, they're still, there's still an element of danger, but I think they're, safe enough.
It's just the right amount of danger.
Yeah, right. I mean, as far as people who, don't want to spar, like, that's like we have our half hour at the end of class. That's sparring time, but as long as you're doing something with a sword during that time, it's fine. You can do whatever. No one's forcing anybody to spar. I just prefer people not to, have conversations during that time on the sidelines.
Mhm.
Another thing that I was thinking of is doing sparring at the beginning of class, like as kind of a warm up.
Yep, I remember you saying that.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, I must have mentioned that. Yeah.
I'll be honest, I thought about that before. I thought to myself, instead of standing around swinging a sword in the air before class starts, what if I sparred with someone and geared up? And I never thought to actually do that. I just kind of thought it in my head, and I was like, nah, that's dumb.
you could totally do that.
I know I could have done it that entire time, but I don't know. I never had the fire lit in my ass to do it.
Yeah, fair enough.
Maybe
We've
because
actually
keep going.
We've done that a couple of times.
Yeah.
Not often. Yeah, we've done a bunch of it with with like low gear, and we've done it at least a couple of times with full kit. I haven't stuck with it. I've kind of been bouncing around, and trying different things like as a warm up, and that was one of the things I tried.
Yeah.
I guess my only concern with that would be, what are the potential risks of doing sparring before you've properly warmed up?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you just launch into it, then that could present all kinds of problems. But if you just like sort of go slow at first and warm up while you're in your gear,
Okay.
and then pick up the intensity, then you can make the adjustments as you go. So you don't like injure yourself.
So sparring is your warm up.
Yeah.
Yeah. It could be used that way. Like I said, we don't do that. Like that's not our standard. We don't do that every
Right.
week. We've just tried it a couple times, but it seems to be okay.